So I have a lot of puzzle making ideas which I've come up with recently, and instead of actually going out and build them, I thought, hey, why don't I try, probably in vain, to describe them to you guys? So my first idea is a way of making barrel cubes. The method I've used for making barrel cubes is to take a Dremel and slowly Dremel away and then use sandpaper. This method is just like ridiculously tedious and gets pretty shitty results. So I've seen it done where people will take a belt sander and then like roll it in between their fingers, and then it will like slowly roll and then become a barrel. But that method also kind of sucks, and my idea was, why not just like put a cube on a lathe, like either a woodworking lathe or a metal lathe, and then like boom, there you go. You could like slowly or like pretty quickly get it into a barrel shape, and then just but not go all the way. Like leave a couple millimeters of extra plastic and then fill in with epoxy sculpt. You don't even need to take it off the lathe if you glued in all the caps properly. You could fill in the puzzle with epoxy sculpt, let it dry, and then go over and shave that last couple millimeters off. And then you have a barrel which will be more perfect than anything you could ever achieve with sandpaper, done really, really easily. And I think the main reason this hasn't been done is probably because in terms of like, you wouldn't really use a lathe for anything else, and I've looked around, and the cheapest lathes I could find are essentially as much as a 3D printer, but it's not really worth it because the only thing you could ever make with them is barrel cubes. But I was thinking, maybe it could be done where you make like a really cheap lathe, like maybe like DIY it, something like take a blender, flip it on its side, make some sort of mount for puzzles, because it doesn't need to be super accurate, like a metalworking lathe is. But yeah, just an idea. Another idea I had was to cut out 4 cubies from a 5x5, as I have the mini 2x2x1, which has the same sized cubies as a 5x5 cubies. So if I took out 4 cubies around one of the corners, just the cube part, and then glued on the chunks that had to be cut off of the original cubie to the 1x2x2, I could have sort of a bandaged 5x5, where if you take it apart, 4 of the cubies actually create a 2x2x1. So the whole 2x1x1 block, or the 1x2x2 blocks rather, would be bandaged, but it would also, when disassembled, be a fully functional puzzle in and of itself. That would be neat. I might actually do that one because it's pretty easy. Alright, so another idea I had was the idea of hybrid puzzles. So basically what it is you have a mass-produced puzzle, and then you clone the design in like SolidWorks or something. You take a bunch of measurements and basically mimic the puzzle in a 3D modeling program. And I've experimented around with this a bit, and I've been able to get it almost dead on, but it's always been a little off. Basically what you could do with these models of the mass-produced puzzles is you could, say, turn a layer 45 degrees in the program and still have pieces that are compatible, so you could print off 5x5 cutter cube layers. So instead of cutting down the original puzzle and then building up with epoxy sculpt, you just print out the custom layer, which is already rotated 45 degrees, so it would be a much, much faster way of making something like a 5x5 cutter cube. Other things that you could do is, I've also experimented around with this, is the idea of a 5x5 mix-up cube, and that's a little more difficult to pull off. It requires slightly slightly cheating almost, I guess, or making things fit when they really shouldn't fit. I've experimented around with that. I haven't quite gotten that dead on though, because there's kind of issues with that. I've also experimented around a little bit with taking the layers in the SolidWorks model and then splitting them up into smaller layers. So you could replace the two middle layers or inner layers of the 5x5, say, with the 3D printed layers, which are split apart, so you can raise the order of the puzzle a little bit. So you can make it like a 7x7 out of a 5x5, or a 9x9 out of a 5x5, or maybe even as much as an 11x11 out of a 5x5 if I want to get a bit creative. But yeah, that's my idea of hybrid puzzles. You could also do stuff like take a corner chunk out of like a corner 2x2 or something in the model, and then make the model for a fully functional 2x2, which would fit, I guess, it would be like a weird shape mod onto a 2x2, which would fit as a corner on a 5x5, and the rest of the puzzle can be fully functional. It would just have a bandaged 2x2x2 block as a corner, and then if you took it apart, then the bandaged 2x2x2 block would be its own puzzle. So yeah. This next idea is more of a performance in making a twisty puzzle, more or less than an original idea. Because I was thinking, how fast could you make a custom puzzle if you wanted to go as fast as possible? And I thought, okay, what's the fastest possible custom puzzle? And what I could come up with would be a 3x3 Slim, because it doesn't require any epoxy sculpting if you make it out of a Xingqiao Wind. So my idea is, you'd have to do a little bit of prep work. It would be kind of cheating. You'd need to lower the center screws on two opposite sides as kind of a prep for this. But essentially the idea is, it would be all filmed in one camera shot, I guess, if it was going to be a video. And you have your unstickered Xingqiao Wind, sorry, and all of the sides with caps are on two opposite sides, and you're going to need to sand the caps down so they come out really easily. But anyways, you have two things of tape on the table in front of you, and if you start the time for making your puzzle as fast as possible, and then you put one of the sides with all the caps down on tape, and then pull up, and then all the caps stay on the tape in their 3x3 grid. So then you have one side with no caps, and you do that with the other side, so you have two sides with no caps. And then you take a table saw, or not a table saw, I guess a table saw, or a table saw would probably be easier, I guess. And then you have some sort of set measure for the thickness, and then a preset some sort of thing for pushing it through so you don't get your fingers stuck. And anyways, you cut through and make the flat cuts really, really quickly. So it would be it would only take a couple seconds for each, and then you flip it around, and then cut through the other side, so you would shave it down really, really quickly. You wouldn't need to use a Dremel or a hacksaw or anything, and it would be perfectly squared up. And then, there's probably going to be slight burrs on the pieces after that, which will help for when you put, you'll line up the 3x3 grid of caps, which is on the tape on the table, and then kind of press it against the puzzle again, so you cap the puzzle, and then twist, so then you have you do that with both sides, and then you have a 3x3 Slim, which could be made in about a minute. And it would be, you're obviously not going to do that every time, but it would be kind of a cool little performance piece, I guess, to make a custom puzzle in under a minute, or about a minute or so. Alright, so these next two ideas, I think I'm going to have a very difficult time trying to explain them, because I've tried to explain them to people before, and they seem to be completely lost, because I have a hard time putting it all into words, I guess. But I'll give this a shot. this whole video is kind of an experiment in trying to explain things with no visuals, so we'll see how we do. So this first design idea is for fully proportional, fully functional 4x1. Now, with no magnets. Now this puzzle is kind of tricky, you know, because you have the corners which should fall out, but there is a way to keep them in and try to explain it. So the core of the puzzle is obviously going to be a 2x2x1 with, you know, some hooks, so you get the inner or the outer edges kind of hooking in, and then, you know, there's enough room there to make sure everything doesn't fall out. So really all you got to worry about is the corners. The corners are the only thing in this equation which are problematic. So my idea is you have a corner and it has two hooks that jet out, you know, little hooked arms. Like if you imagine the corners on a 1x2x5, you know, you got an arm and then there's a hook, and you'd have two of them at 90-degree angles from each other. And these hooks would be flexible. They could move, and they would rotate, and they would be spring-loaded, so they always want to be as far apart from each other as possible. And then by, you know, the resistance is going the other way, pushing them in towards the center of the puzzle. Now, as you would make a turn, the hooks would not be in the center. They would be offset. So one would be, you know, it would be a mirror. There'd be rotational symmetry, but one of them would be farther to one of the edges than the other. And that would mean that the puzzle could only make clockwise or counterclockwise moves, but not both counterclockwise and clockwise turns. So you'd have to choose which one you wanted, and then the puzzle would only be able to turn in that direction, but it wouldn't matter because it only makes 180-degree turns. But basically, as you turn, one of the two spring-loaded hooks starts getting forced out of position, and then it starts folding, and then it folds 90 degrees. So then it moves out of the way, so then the corner can still be hooked on one side, and then the other hook will rotate and then hook doubly onto the other cubie. So essentially you have a cubie which is held in place by the two hooks, one of them which stayed in place throughout the whole time, and the other one that went rotated 90 degrees. And then they would be offsets. They wouldn't be both on the exact same pivot point. One of them would be, you know, inset a little bit, and that would mean that the cubie wouldn't rotate, flop around. It would be forced to remain in a proper position. And then as the turn progresses, the one right as it reaches a certain point, the hook which was rotated 90 degrees, it's still spring-loaded, so it still wants to spring back, and it'll reach a point right towards the end of the turn where there's a void. It encounters a void, so it's no longer held back, so it'll like snap back into place, and then you finish the turn fully off, and then it settles into a ridge where it can remain hooked in. So using that mechanism, you could have a perfectly fully functional, fully proportional 4x4x1. There's only one compromise, if you want to call it a compromise, and that it could only, in a practical sense, rotate either clockwise or counterclockwise, but not both. And it might be possible to do it where, you know, it doesn't matter, you can go either clockwise or counterclockwise, but the two hooks would intersect each other, so that would kind of get a little bit messy, but it could be done. It's just, it wouldn't really be worth it. So that's my idea. I have made a few models sort of trying to visualize this, but I haven't really given it too much time, just because, you know, there's so much planning involved in a puzzle like that, because the turning is quite hard to get your mind around. So I probably didn't explain that very well, because I mean, even I have a hard time visualizing it, and I can visualize it, so I don't know. Hopefully you guys. So that was how to make a 4x4x1. This next idea is significantly more complicated, but I'm much more certain that it would work, because I've kind of proven with models that each little bit of it could work, so if the puzzle was actually to be made, it would most likely be fully functional, but probably not practical. And that is how to make a fully proportional, fully functional 5x5x1 without using magnets. Now, this mechanism uses a series of gears and hooks. Now, the way this works is the cubies have these gears inside them. There's a big gear and there's a small gear. The big gear has a radius, which is a circumference, which is 3 times the edge length of the cubie. What this means is, essentially, the gear would have to rotate. If it did made one full rotation, and it was rolling along the table, it would travel the distance of 3 cubies, side by side by side. And then that's the big gear. There is a small gear, which doesn't really matter how big it is. Well, it needs to be rather small. There's one, like the big gear has, the big teeth, which is 3 times, the radius is 3 times the edge length, and it has a small gear on the other side of it, and they're both connected. And then it connects to another small gear with the same sizes. This is so hard to explain. Anyways, the small gear has 3 hooks equally spaced, and in the resting position, these hooks are like none of them stick out of the puzzle, or out of the cubie. The cubie's flat. The only thing that sticks out is just a little bit of the teeth from the big gear. And basically, you have another kind of cubie, and this cubie it doesn't have any gears, it just has canals, little channels for the hooks to hook into, and it has, I guess, pinions? I mean, this is sort of a rack and pinion. I think that's the terminology, where you have a gear and then like some flat laid out teeth. So anyways, the gear engages with these teeth, and they run along the edge of the cubie, and that means it's the edge length, basically. So the big gear, the master gear, will rotate 1/3. And since there's 3, it'll rotate 1/3 if they slide past each other completely, basically, because the gear will have traveled the distance of 1 edge length, anyways. And that'll mean that the 3 gears, or the 3 hooks on the small gear will exchange places, basically. They'll orbit, so they'll go from, one position to another. And this means that halfway through the 2 cubies sliding past each other, you have one of the 3 hooks on the small gear sticking out a little above the surface and hooking into the canal of the or the channel of the other cubie, basically locking them together. And what essentially this all amounts to is you have cubies which lock together just by sliding past each other. So you don't really need anything else going on. You just have 2 cubies that lock together by sliding past each other, which cubies do nothing but slide past each other in normal puzzles. So if you have a mechanism that's based off of that, you can get away with some things that you normally can't. So in a 5x5x1, the corners are held together by, or the corners are held in place by these hooks, and they engage and disengage as the puzzle turns, because the cubies will slide past each other, the hooks will disengage, and then when the turn is coming towards an end and they start sliding into place at the end of the turn, the hooks re-engage. And through this mechanism, you can have a 5x5x1, which doesn't require any trickery, no Olsing, and it can be fully proportional. Now, you would need a few little minor pins and stuff, which would be spring-loaded, and they would essentially move back and forth depending on where you are in the turn. And these would just be needed because the cubies would fall out, or they wouldn't fall out, but they could technically be turned out of place if you wanted to halfway through a turn. So by having these little pins that kind of lock the layers in place while it's turning, and then they disengage the second that the turn is over, you have a puzzle which wouldn't theoretically fall apart halfway through a turn. Now, this design is really, really not elegant, I guess. I mean, I can't think of a easier way to go about making the fully functional 5x5x1 with no magnets, but that's about the best I can come up with. But the issue is that the small gears and the hooks would be really small in comparison to the full cubie, and I've been able to make a model which was almost working. The small the small hooks on the small gear were still a little too big, and the cubie was 50 millimeters to an edge. So unless I use a better 3D printer, you know, you would have to make this with cubies that are essentially bigger than 50 millimeters to an edge to get any sort of practical hookage going on, which means a gigantic puzzle, which means it'd take forever. So it's not realistic as a puzzle, but it is kind of a theoretical means of making a 5x5x1. So yeah, that's the 5x5x1. I think I'll finish off this video with another theoretically possible puzzle which would be way too big to actually feasibly pull off. And it's an idea I had for making a fully proportional 9x9x9. So, in a 9x9x9 fully proportional, the only cubies which would totally be eliminated from having any sort of like chunk, I guess, attached to it, like the outermost edges would still have a little bit of overhang. They would still just barely be able to hang into the puzzle, but the corner would be completely disconnected, disembodied from the rest of the corner, so they would fall out. Now my idea, again, it would need to be made on a pretty big scale for this to have any sort of feasible engineering possibility. But what it would be is the corner would be hooked. There would be 3 hooks hooking into the corner, and so at a stationary position that'd be fine. Now, as the puzzle turns, the hook kind of there's like a channel, and it's kind of like a wedge shape, or like a U shape, I guess, kind of that kind of thing. So it starts, or crescent, I don't know. It starts forcing the hook down, and then it finally gets pressed below the area, so it gets completely disengaged, and then the turn continues. Now, it would obviously have to be some sort of spring-loaded mechanism to make that work, so it kind of gets pushed down and then would go back up. Now, if there wasn't anything else going on, the second the turn would be over, or the turn would pass a certain point, the little hook, which would be on the outermost edge, would just spring back up, and then you wouldn't be able to complete a turn. Because then, at the end, the corners would start running into these hooks, and they wouldn't be able to engage in anything, and they would just sort of lock up. Now, my idea would be to use the same mechanism which used in pens, and the idea here is you would use the cycle of a pen click to make it so these edges would not collide with the hooks. So the hooks would get pressed down, and that would be a click. And then the turn would progress, and they would only go up a little bit, because you press a pen, and then when the pen is extended, the little button, it only goes up a small portion of what it originally was at. So using the pen click mechanism, you could click the hook down, and then it would pop up a little bit, but it wouldn't pop up to its full hooking potential, I guess. Turn progresses, and the top of the hook would be rounded a little bit. So as the turn progresses, as you make it back to where, okay, the corners are going to need to start engaging with these hooks again, right as the two cubies hit, the hook is, the little rounded nub is kind of pushed down just that little bit, and then that re-engages the pen click. So then as the channel comes into view, I guess, the little nub hook thing kind of bounces back up just through the spring power, and then engages with the channels on the corner cubie. So then as it comes to a full stop, the corner is fully engaged with the hook, and the hook is fully extended. So then as you go to make another turn, the shaping of the canal on the hook would force the pen click back down. I don't know how precise that was. I'm not sure if any of you guys have any idea what I was saying. I barely know what I'm saying. Well, no, I mean these ideas are very precise in my head, but they're hard to explain. So yeah, this was the insane ramblings of a puzzle maker. Thank you for watching.